Lisa and I were married in Sudbury, Ontario in, what was it, like 1994? Something like that. I have great memories of that day, of course, but my most vivid is just how sore my cheeks were from smiling for pictures by the time the day was over. Smile before the ceremony, smile during the ceremony, and after the ceremony. Smile at the church, smile for official pictures, smile at the reception and the dance. But it was worth smiling about. Worthy of a marathon of smiling that day, yes. And this summer, in about a month, we will have been married for 23 years. So, but in those days, oh, thank you. I think that's mostly for you. Yeah. In those days, thanks, Tom. In those days, finishing school, as we were, planning a wedding, paying rent, paying car payments, all the typical expenses of a couple beginning the journey of their lives together, we found ourselves also planning for a honeymoon after the wedding. Where would we go? What was within the budget? Well, in those days, there wasn't any significant budget, so we simply had to decide to go somewhere where neither of us have been, but both of us were interested in going. Okay, so we were in Sudbury. So we decided to go to Ottawa. It's a beautiful city. Ottawa's great. We had gray, rainy weather. That's what we had. That ruled our week. But we enjoyed lots of sights, toured lots of different things in Ottawa. It's a beautiful city. When we thought about accommodation, we aimed low. We aimed really low. Keep costs down, right? Well, my dad caught wind of the kind of motels we were looking at staying in Ottawa, and he didn't think that was appropriate for a guy to take his new bride to. And so he pulled some strings and got us a deal that I'd never forget. Instead of some little motel on the outside edge of town, we stayed in the nicest hotel I had ever, in fact, been to in my whole life. We were right downtown Ottawa. We stayed on the 25th floor. I don't even know if there were more floors than that above it. The building was modern. Metal and glass exterior, spotless clean interior. The room itself was a suite. I didn't know they had suites. Had a little kitchen with a fridge and a stove and a dishwasher. Had a living room with a TV, had a whole separate bedroom, and a 25-story view of downtown core of Ottawa, including the Parliament buildings. It was a beautiful place to stay. We'd go out for the day and leave our breakfast dishes on the counter, and when we got back, they were all clean, put away in the dishwasher, and it was all done up for us. It was great. Dad never did tell us the extent of the discount he secured for us, but we found out. Turns out that inside of the door of that hotel room, you know the inside of the hotel room door, they have the little floor plan of how to escape if something goes awry. Well, just underneath that little floor plan was hung another plaque. And that plaque indicated the nightly rental for the room at normal rates. We had been prepared to stay in a motel for something around $90 a night. Dad got us this luxury hotel for only $10 more, $100 a night. The little plaque on the door, $625. $625. It's the kind of place that if Lisa and I would be charged full price, all we would have been able to afford would be drive by and wonder what kind of people stay in a place like that. But we weren't outside looking in with our noses pressed against the glass. We were in. We enjoyed the luxuries. We took full advantage. We appreciated the opportunity. But the only way it was possible is because someone else closed the gap for us, right? There was the price way down here of what we could afford. Then there was the price way up here of full cost. And it was only possible to get in because someone else bridged that gap. There was absolutely no chance we could have ever dreamed, hey, let's splurge and let's just go ahead and pay the $625 a night and enjoy our honeymoon. Dad pulled strings and got us a rate that we could actually afford. We paid some, but he closed the gap. In Romans chapter 10, verse 9, it says this: if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, then you will be saved. It took me a long time to read this verse properly. It's hard not to look at passages like this one and others like it in the Bible, and understand them as or else statements. It's hard not to look at them as or else statements. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, then you will be saved. And the follow-up implication is that without those affirmations, you're not saved, right? You better believe in your heart that God raised Jesus from the dead, or else. You better confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, or else. And the or else part causes all kind of anxiety. The or else is a lot of pressure. How do I, as an individual, process any thoughts or moments of doubt with that ominous or else hanging overhead? Well, all I'll do is suppress it, and I won't ask honest questions, and I'll never get complete answers, and then my faith will be paper thin. And what do I do with my neighbor who has not confessed Jesus as Lord in this or else environment? I might do one of two things. I might hold them at arm's length in case their unfaith rubs off on me. Or I might get over preachy with them to the point where they hide behind the rack of hamburger buns in the grocery store just so they don't have to talk to me. The pressure of the or else implications of this verse tends to drive us to urgent actions. And urgent actions aren't always helpful. Too much pressure on myself or too much pressure on my neighbor, both those errors lead to an ungenuine faith. It took me a long time to recognize that this passage is instead written in the positive, not the negative. The pattern here is invitation and promise, not threat and intimidation. Is the wonderful promise that if you do these simple things, then Christ fills the gap that you could not fill on your own. Yes, we have a part to play in our own salvation. We need to understand the person of Jesus enough to be drawn to him, even fascinated by him. And then in the best way we know by faith, we need to embrace him for ourselves. And then Scripture promises that is sufficient assent to warrant God filling the gap the rest of the way, so that our sin might be forgiven and salvation might be our reality. On our wedding day, Lisa and I, we had a reception afterward, of course. About 120 guests, so it was a decent-sized wedding. We had a full turkey dinner. And then after dinner, they moved the tables all out of the way in the dining hall, and we had a dance. It was great fun, and lots of different people participated. Lisa and I enjoyed the day so much that we stayed quite late. We didn't leave the dance and the fellowship with everybody till well after midnight. When we finally said our goodbyes and left the dance hall, we went outside, yet had a suspicious entourage of cousins follow us out the door. As we approached our car, we realized these amigos were not merely following us out to wish us a fond farewell. What they really wanted to do was see our reaction because they had dressed up our car. Toilet paper and streamers all around our car. More toilet paper and more streamers inside the car, and worse yet, spilled all over the interior of the car, and so very difficult to clean up was confetti. There must have been a sale on confetti at the bulk store because they used lots. That night in the parking lot, we just did a basic cleanup, armfuls of toilet paper picked up and thrown out, and then we left. In the morning, before we headed on our trip to Ottawa, we had to clean up the interior. So we vacuumed and picked and vacuumed. It took a while, but we did a pretty good job. Only the odd stray piece of confetti was left. The car was nice and clean and ready for a road trip, except I neglected to check. No, it didn't even occur to me that I should check the heater vents in the car for confetti. So I remember exactly the bend in the road in downtown Ottawa where on that particular rainy day when the windshield began to fog up just a little, I asked Lisa, would you turn the heater fan on because the windshield's fogging up. So she reached over and turned it from off to full speed, and poof, out of the vents comes flying all this confetti. And it wasn't even a poof, because that might indicate a single explosion of confetti. This was more like a fire hose spraying frantically out of control, and you don't know how to shut it off. So surprised were we that it took a few seconds to react and get it turned off. Any guesses as to how long it took us to get all of the confetti cleared out of the car and out of the heater vents? Yeah, never. We never did. We never got it all out. Drove that car for years, and whenever the fan was on, we could hit some bump in the road and all of a sudden and unexpectedly dislodge a few pieces of confetti from some remote corner of the internal ventilation system, and out would pop 2 or 3 confettis, reminding us of that time. I've always understood sin to be a little bit like that. There is so much, so consistently, buried so deep within the fabric of the human person that we could never fully get rid of it, at least not by our own effort. We can scrub and we can clean and we can try with all the self-discipline we can muster, but all that effort is futile for the purpose. The Old Testament very famously contains the 10 Commandments. Just those 10 are hard to follow to the letter. 2 of them are do not lie and do not covet. Person can hardly get past those 2, never mind all 10. But did you know the rest of the Mosaic Law contains another 600 odd rules? Some are practical and obvious, but others are just plain obscure. And all of those laws, whether about foods you can eat, property markers you should not move, or how to show hospitality to the stranger, all of those rules have the chief goal of revealing to the human individual that they're incapable of following them all. The Bible reveals to you all of these rules and then confirms that, by the way, you can't possibly follow them. You can't actually pull this off. The goal of Old Testament law is not that you might rise to the challenge and live a holy life. The goal, rather, is that you would recognize your need for God to step in and fill the gap. The gap between my tarnished obedience and God's holy righteousness. And when you do finally recognize that need, you would be humble enough to do what? To confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead. And then you will be saved. God will close the gap. Some Christian traditions believe it necessary to baptize a baby ASAP, within days after he or she is born. The reason essentially is to ensure that the child is covered in case it might die young. In the past and in different parts of the world, infant mortality can be quite high. And so there is an urgency to baptize the children and protect them against the or else kind of understanding of these biblical statements. The issue in their mind is original sin. The understanding is that babies are born with the future inevitability and also the current guilt of sin. They've not yet done anything wrong, but just by being human, it makes you guilty by association to Adam and Eve and their original sin, which was what? They ate the fruit, right? And that sin, the guilt of that sin is passed down generation to generation to generation. And as soon as you're born, some believe, you've got that guilt heaped on you right away. In our church tradition, however, we understand things slightly different. Yes, we are all inevitably going to sin once we have free choice. Just watch kids playing where one wants the toy, but only when the other one is playing with it, right? But we understand babies are not born with guilt just yet. They have nothing to apologize for. Not yet. Lawson has, so far, Lawson spent actually his whole life as part of the church. I was reminded that he was born last summer. It was during the week of VBS. Is that right? And one of his first trips was to the church. VBS is where we have kids from our church, kids from other churches, kids from the neighborhood come to the church for games and activities and stories and even snacks. But on the way home from the hospital with Lawson, one of his first stops was the church. He must have liked it because he's been back lots since, so that's good. Of course, his parents are encouraging him toward a life of faith, but the great potential in Lawson's life, or in the life of any young child, is not that they will be righteous and then stay that way. That's too much to ask for. They all will make mistakes, or they will all inevitably choose to sin at some point, at least sometimes. So the great hope is not that our children would remain spotless and free of guilt. Rather, the great potential is that once they are guilty, they would understand the great love and grace and mercy of God. They would lock onto the truth that Jesus died on the cross and raised from the grave. They would believe that internally in their hearts. And then so confident in the profound gift offered by God, they would not hesitate to tell that story to others. Not in a pressure tactic way, but as a witness telling their side of the story. Here's what I know. Here's been my experience. And that's the potential I see in Lawson and others. And so my prayer for Lawson, and for Owen and Rosalind, and for my own 3 kids, and for all your kids, and for your grandkids, and for you too, quite frankly, by the way, is that you would stand fast in the confidence that God has closed the gap between you and Him. No shame, no hiding, no denial about past wrongs. I pray that we would confess with our mouths that Jesus is Lord and believe in our hearts that God raised Him from the dead so that we might know the fullness of a rejuvenated relationship with Him. Amen. Harvey, can we have you and Betty